The cream envelope waits on Robert's kitchen table like a time bomb. 65 years have taught his hands steadiness through war zones and intelligence operations, yet they tremble now, brushing the expensive paper. Eleanor's engagement announcement unfolds, his ex-wife marrying Brandon, the billionaire. The embossed lettering blurs as the first tear falls, splashing onto "just a secretary" in the bride's description of her former husband. Has someone erased your life's work too? Share below if this ache feels familiar, like if betrayal has touched you. Follow for Robert's journey from heartbreak to vindication. The grandfather clock ticks accusingly in the silence as coffee grows cold beside him. A photograph from happier times watches from the wall. Eleanor laughing at their anniversary dinner, 2 years before she began her affair with Brandon. Another tear falls, this one for the loss of what never truly existed. Robert's intelligence training hadn't protected him from the most intimate deception. The cream envelope waited on Robert's desk like an unexploded mine. His fingers, steady through decades of intelligence operations, trembled slightly as they traced the expensive paper's edge. Afternoon light slanted through half-drawn curtains, dust motes dancing in golden beams that fell across the polished maple surface. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked away seconds with military precision. Robert's breath caught as he slid a letter opener beneath the flap. The paper inside was heavy, embossed, the kind intelligence agencies favored for secure communications. Eleanor's engagement announcement to Brandon Mercer unfolded in his hands, her flowing script describing her billionaire fiancé and her former husband, just a secretary. Just a secretary, he whispered, voice cracking on the final word. The study around him, his sanctuary for the 5 years since the divorce, suddenly felt smaller. Leather chair creaked as he leaned back, releasing the faint musk of countless nights spent reading intelligence reports. A family photo on the bookshelf caught the fading light, Eleanor's smile now seeming calculated rather than warm. The coffee in his cup had gone cold, forgotten. A single tear escaped, landing precisely on the words, "Secretary of the Bride." The moisture seeped into expensive paper, blurring ink like truth blurring into lies. Memories flooded back, Eleanor questioning his late nights during their marriage, her dismissive laugh when he couldn't explain classified operations. Not now, not after all these years. His chest tightened as another tear threatened. The modest study, with its carefully organized books and hidden safes, contained more intelligence expertise than most government departments. Yet Eleanor had reduced decades of service to just a secretary, a fiction she'd crafted during their divorce that had somehow become reality to everyone else. Robert's hand moved to the desk drawer, hesitating momentarily before spinning the combination with practiced ease. Inside lay his intelligence service commendation, hidden away since Eleanor had called it just a piece of paper during their last argument. His fingers traced the embossed seal, the weight of accomplishment momentarily steadying his emotions. The answering machine in the corner blinked with 3 messages, all from Michael. His son hadn't called in months. The timing couldn't be coincidence. Robert's trained eye returned to the invitation, noticing details others would miss. The paper stock, the watermark visible when held to light, the particular weight that spoke of secured communications. Why would Brandon Mercer, a civilian businessman, use paper specifically crafted for intelligence agencies? He reached for his magnifying glass, professional instincts overtaking emotional response. The monogram in the corner wasn't merely decorative, it belonged to a specialized security printer that required government clearance. As he examined the raised lettering, a final tear dried on his cheek, leaving a salty trail like evidence at a crime scene. A soft knock at the front door pulled his attention. Robert straightened his shoulders, military posture returning instinctively. The invitation remained on his desk, a battle plan beginning to form in his mind. Whatever game Eleanor and Brandon were playing, they'd chosen the wrong opponent. Some secrets were buried too deep for anyone but an intelligence specialist to uncover. And Robert Walsh had been much more than just a secretary. Robert wiped his eyes with the monogrammed handkerchief his father had given him decades ago. The white cotton square still bore the faint scent of his aftershave, a small connection to a man who'd taught him that dignity meant facing truth, however painful. Composure returned through the familiar motion, a lifetime of training reasserting control over momentary weakness. The invitation lay on his desk, innocuous yet damning. Setting it aside, Robert rose and moved to the painting of the Grand Canyon that hung slightly askew on the eastern wall. His fingers found the hidden latch, revealing the wall safe he'd installed during the divorce. The combination, Eleanor's birthday, backwards, now seemed like bitter irony. "Old habits," he murmured, voice steadier now. Inside lay the financial records from the divorce proceedings, meticulously organized in red folders. He'd been an intelligence analyst long enough to know that money always told stories people tried to hide. The leather chair creaked as he settled back, spreading documents across the desk with methodical precision. Evening shadows lengthened across the room. Robert didn't bother turning on additional lamps. The desk light created a focused island in growing darkness, like a spotlight on evidence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling window frames as if nature itself were disturbed by what he was uncovering. His finger traced hotel charges from 5 years ago, stopping abruptly at a pattern he should have recognized sooner. The Waldorf Astoria, Chicago, the Four Seasons, Boston, the Peninsula, Los Angeles. All charged when Eleanor claimed to be at publishing conferences, all matching Brandon Mercer's known business travel schedule from that period. She said she was in Chicago for her editor. A memory surfaced, Eleanor's voice on the phone, 5 years ago. "The conference ran late, darling. Don't wait up." In the background, champagne glasses clinked. A man laughed. When questioned later, she'd dismissed his concerns with practiced ease. "You're being paranoid, Robert." "That's the problem with your job. You see conspiracies everywhere." His hand trembled unexpectedly, spilling cold coffee across his sleeve and onto one of the statements. The brown liquid spread across the paper like a revelation, underlining a jewelry store purchase made 1 week before Eleanor filed for divorce. Robert stood abruptly, pacing 3 measured steps to the window. The neighbors' lights glowed across the way, a family gathered for dinner. His reflection in the glass looked older than his 65 years, the strain of discovery etching new lines around his eyes. His left hand moved unconsciously to where his wedding ring had once been, the groove still faintly visible after all this time. The financial trail was unmistakable now that he looked with clear eyes. Their marriage had been over 2 years before Eleanor filed for divorce, while he still brought her breakfast in bed on Sundays, while he still planned their retirement, while he still believed. The answering machine's red light blinked insistently in the corner. Michael's calls remained unanswered, but a different name caught Robert's attention in the call log: Victor Ramirez. His former colleague wouldn't reach out after all this time without good reason. Robert's jaw tightened, a tell from his intelligence days that would have given away his emotional state to those who knew him well. He returned to the desk, pulled out a fresh legal pad, and began creating a timeline with the same methodical approach he'd used to track foreign assets throughout his career. The affair had begun in April, 2 years before their separation. The divorce filing came exactly 1 month after Brandon Mercer's company announced a major acquisition. The timing wasn't just suspicious, it was calculated. As he organized the evidence, Robert noticed a credit card statement showing a purchase at Tiffany's the week before Eleanor asked for a divorce. What significant gift had been purchased, and was it already planned while they celebrated their anniversary that same month? For the first time since the divorce, anger replaced hurt in Robert's chest, not the hot, impulsive kind, but the cold, focused variety that had made him effective in intelligence work. Eleanor hadn't just broken his heart. She'd executed a strategic deception while he remained blind to the obvious signs. The cool, analytical part of his mind, the part that had tracked threats to national security for decades, was finally awakening from its 5-year slumber. The skills he'd honed through his career hadn't disappeared. They'd simply been dormant, waiting for the right moment to reemerge. Robert reached for the phone. Jessica Wu had been his corporate attorney for 15 years. If anyone could help him understand Brandon Mercer's company structure, it would be her. The clock showed 9:17 p.m. Late, but Jessica would answer. She always did. As he dialed, a new sense of purpose replaced the ache that had resided in his chest since finding the invitation. Eleanor and Brandon had made a critical mistake in their calculated game. They'd underestimated exactly who Robert Walsh really was. The financial records lay in neat chronological order across Robert's desk, each damning page a testament to Eleanor's calculated betrayal. The clock in the hallway chimed midnight, but sleep was far from his mind. Robert's hands, which had trembled earlier with emotion, now moved with surgical precision as he arranged the evidence. His computer screen cast a harsh blue glow across the darkened study. Brandon Mercer's company structure unfurled before him, a complex web of subsidiaries, holding companies, and international entities. To the untrained eye, it appeared impenetrable. To Robert, it revealed vulnerabilities like a blueprint with clearly marked exits. "Asset intelligence," he murmured, the phrase bringing a familiar focus. The printer hummed rhythmically, spitting out organizational charts that Robert pinned to his corkboard. Outside, the neighbors' lights had long gone dark. Through the slightly open window came the distant smell of someone's late dinner, highlighting his own solitary evening. He hadn't eaten since morning, but hunger was an inconvenience he'd learned to ignore during long intelligence operations. A memory surfaced from his training days. Financial structures reveal more than people's words ever will. Follow the money, and you'll find the truth. His mentor's voice, clear after 30 years. Robert had used that principle to track terrorist financing and foreign intelligence operations. Now he would use it for a more personal mission. The untouched water in his glass caught the computer's glow, reflecting tear tracks on his cheeks he hadn't bothered to wipe away. They were drying now, salt crystallizing like his resolve. In Brandon's corporate architecture, Robert identified 3 potential pressure points: subsidiaries with regulatory concerns, over-leveraged acquisitions, and a particular holding company registered in Delaware with an unusual ownership structure. His analyst's mind cataloged each weakness methodically. "Interesting," he whispered, noticing a pattern in the quarterly reports. Brandon's company had experienced a sudden financial upturn precisely when Eleanor began divorce proceedings. Coincidence seemed unlikely. Robert reached for his phone, then checked the time. Even Jessica would be asleep at this hour. Morning would be soon enough to make the call. He turned instead to the RSVP card that had accompanied the invitation. The card sat under his desk lamp, cream-colored and embossed like the invitation. Robert picked up his fountain pen, a retirement gift from the intelligence service, and held it poised above the response line. For a moment, doubt crept in. Did he really want to walk into that party, face Eleanor and her smug fiancé, revisit the humiliation? The pen hovered, a drop of ink gathering at its tip like a tear about to fall. Then, with sudden decisiveness, he checked, "Will attend," with a firm press that left an indentation on the paper beneath, the kind of mark that couldn't be erased. He addressed the envelope with the same precise handwriting he'd used on countless intelligence reports. As he sealed the envelope, his cell phone buzzed with a text message. "Michael, Mom's engagement party next month. Will you be okay? Haven't heard back from you." Robert set the phone down without responding. His son had chosen sides during the divorce, believing Eleanor's version of events. That wound still felt fresh, even after 5 years. The night had deepened around him. but Robert felt more awake than he had in years. He walked to the bookshelf and pulled out a leather-bound volume of Kipling's poems, a false cover he'd crafted years ago. Behind it lay a hidden compartment containing tools from his former profession: a microdot camera, encryption keys, and a small notebook filled with contact information for people who officially didn't exist. Some skills never left you, even in retirement. Robert sat back down at his desk and opened a new document on his computer. With methodical precision, he began creating a systematic evidence file: dates, locations, financial transactions, all pointing to an affair that predated the divorce by years. The screen's glow illuminated a face transformed from hurt to determination. As dawn's first light crept through the curtains, Robert's email pinged with an alert he'd set up years ago but had forgotten: a financial monitoring service tracking significant movements in certain corporate sectors. The notification showed unusual activity in Brandon Mercer's company stock. "Who else is watching you, Brandon?" Robert murmured, curiosity piqued. The final tear had long since dried on his cheek. In its place was something Eleanor would have recognized had she truly known her husband: the focused expression of an intelligence operative who had just identified his target. Truth, not vengeance, would be his mission. But sometimes, truth burned cleaner than fire. Jessica Wu's corner office commanded a view of downtown that had always reminded Robert of surveillance photos. People reduced to patterns of movement, buildings to geometric shapes. 16 floors below, traffic flowed in predictable streams, orderly despite apparent chaos. Just like intelligence work. "This acquisition strategy is unusually personal for you," Jessica observed, tapping her Mont Blanc pen against the leather portfolio. Sunlight glinted off her glasses as she studied him. "Mercer Communications isn't your typical investment target." Robert maintained the neutral expression that had served him through hundreds of interrogations. "Diversification," he offered simply. Jessica's raised eyebrow suggested she wasn't convinced, but professionalism prevented further questions. By noon, the papers were signed, the first phase of Robert's strategic acquisition initiated through shell companies and blind trusts. Jessica wouldn't connect the target to Eleanor's fiancé unless Robert wanted her to. The drive home felt longer than usual, his mind processing multiple scenarios like a chess player seeing 12 moves ahead. A courier was waiting at his door with a package, corporate filings he'd requested through back channels. Robert signed for it with a steady hand that betrayed nothing of his inner tension. Inside his study, he methodically spread the documents across his desk. Brandon Mercer had built an impressive communications empire, but the foundation showed hairline fractures only visible to experienced eyes, over-leveraged acquisitions, regulatory concerns in 3 states, a board growing restless with his expansionary vision. "Vulnerabilities," Robert murmured, circling key points with a red pen. At 3 o'clock, he moved to his home office, the converted spare bedroom where he kept more specialized equipment. The old backup drive hummed as he connected it, searching for files he'd archived during the divorce. Eleanor had always been careless with her passwords, reusing variations of their anniversary and her childhood pet's name. A mistake Robert had never corrected. The encrypted emails appeared on his screen like ghosts from another life. Eleanor to Brandon, dated 2 years before she filed for divorce. "He suspects nothing, still bringing me coffee in bed like the dutiful husband." Brandon's reply: "The dutiful secretary, you mean?" "2 more years, then you're free." Robert's hand tightened on the mouse until his knuckles whitened. The betrayal's calculated nature hit him with physical force, as if someone had struck him in the chest. He scrolled further, each message more damning than the last. A particular date caught his eye: their 20th anniversary. Eleanor had claimed a publishing emergency that night. The emails revealed the truth. She'd been with Brandon at the Ritz-Carlton, while Robert sat alone at the restaurant where he'd made reservations months in advance, repeatedly checking his watch as other diners cast pitying glances. Something snapped inside him. With a sudden violence that surprised even himself, Robert swept the papers from his desk, sending them fluttering to the floor like wounded birds. The uncharacteristic display of emotion left him breathing hard, heart pounding in his ears. "They planned it all," he said aloud, voice unfamiliar with its rare venom. For several minutes, he stood motionless by the window, watching rain begin to streak the glass like tears he refused to shed. His reflection showed a face transformed by anger, a man he hardly recognized after years of careful control. A single drop escaped his eye, quickly wiped away with an impatient gesture. Anger was a luxury intelligence operatives couldn't afford. It clouded judgment, led to mistakes. Robert took 3 deep breaths, centering himself with techniques learned decades ago. Methodically, he knelt to retrieve the scattered papers, reorganizing them with deliberate calm. The momentary loss of control was over, replaced by cold, focused purpose. He straightened his tie, a habitual gesture from his intelligence days that signaled a mental reset. At his desk once more, Robert constructed a comprehensive timeline of the affair alongside the divorce proceedings. The pattern was unmistakable. Eleanor had timed her departure to maximize financial benefit, waiting until Brandon's company completed a major acquisition that increased his net worth by 40%. Robert poured himself a glass of scotch but left it untouched, needing clarity more than comfort. Night fell outside as he worked, rain intensifying against the windows like an accusatory drumbeat. A deeper search through corporate records revealed something unexpected. Brandon Mercer appeared to maintain residences in 3 cities under slightly different name variations. Credit card statements showed parallel patterns of dining, hotels, and jewelry purchases in each location. "How many lives are you living, Brandon?" Robert murmured, printing the evidence. The most damning document appeared near midnight, a photograph from a society column in Boston showing Brandon at a charity gala with a woman identified as Catherine Mills, described as his fiancé. The date, 3 months ago. Robert sat back, processing the implications. Eleanor wasn't just the betrayer. She was also being betrayed. Brandon Mercer was playing an even more complex game than Robert had imagined. The anger that had briefly overwhelmed him earlier was gone now, replaced by something colder and more focused. This wasn't just about his wounded pride or broken heart anymore. It was about exposing a pattern of calculated deception that had damaged multiple lives. Robert's cell phone rang, Jessica calling despite the late hour. "The acquisition paperwork raised flags with Mercer's legal team," she said without preamble. "They're trying to identify the buyer. Also, someone named Victor Ramirez has been asking about your recent activities. Said he's an old colleague. Should I be concerned?" Robert's pulse quickened slightly at Victor's name. They hadn't spoken in years, not since their final intelligence operation had ended with disagreement over methods. "No concern," Robert replied evenly. "Tell me more about Mercer's reaction." As Jessica detailed the legal countermoves, Robert made notes in the precise shorthand he'd developed during his intelligence career. Brandon was getting nervous, which meant Robert's strategy was working. When the call ended, Robert returned to the evidence spread across his desk, a plan crystallizing in his mind. The scotch remained untouched, catching lamplight like amber memories of a life he'd once believed was real. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It had depths that transformed it from a private wound to something that demanded justice, not for vengeance, but for truth. Outside, the rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, washing the world clean for tomorrow. The pounding on Robert's front door matched the thunderstorm raging outside. At 11 p.m., visitors were rare enough to trigger professional caution. Robert checked the security monitor. Victor Ramirez stood on the porch, rain cascading from his fedora in steady streams. Robert opened the door to the face of a man who had once saved his life in Vienna and later questioned his ethics in Damascus. 68 now, Victor still carried himself with military bearing despite the slight stoop of age. His raincoat dripped onto the welcome mat, creating a small puddle that spread like the uncomfortable silence between them. 5 years of silence, and now you show up at my door in a thunderstorm, Robert observed, stepping aside to let Victor enter. Dramatic timing was always my specialty, Victor replied, removing his soaked hat. You're the one who preferred subtlety. In Robert's study, Victor declined the offered scotch, his dark eyes scanning the evidence wall Robert had constructed. Photos, financial statements, corporate records connected by red thread in a web of deception. Lightning flashed through the windows, momentarily illuminating the scar on Victor's temple, a souvenir from their last operation together. This isn't just about your ex-wife's engagement, is it? Victor asked, gesturing to the elaborate display. It's about truth, Robert answered, settling into his leather chair. Victor remained standing, hands clasped behind his back in the posture they'd both learned at the farm decades ago. Is it truth or vengeance you're after, Robert? The line gets blurry when it's personal. The question landed like a physical blow. Robert's mouth opened to respond, but Victor continued, his voice gentle despite the harsh words. You're using intelligence techniques against civilians, tracking their movements, invading their privacy, plotting financial warfare. Victor moved closer to the evidence wall. This isn't what we were trained for. They deceived me for years, Robert countered, feeling defensive for the first time in their long acquaintance. Victor nodded slowly. Yes, they did. But this, he gestured to the elaborate investigation, feels like disproportionate response. What's the end game here? Financial ruin? Public humiliation? Will any of that heal what's broken? Robert stood, moving to his desk where the acquisition papers lay in neat stacks. I'm just exposing the truth. With all the subtlety of a tactical strike, Victor replied, picking up a document. Did you know your son helped Eleanor gather information against you during the divorce? The words hit Robert with such force that he had to grip the edge of his desk to remain standing. What are you talking about? Victor's face showed no satisfaction in delivering the blow. Michael believed her version of events. She convinced him you were hiding assets, planning to leave her with nothing. He reached into his coat, producing a folder. He accessed some of your accounts, provided statements. Robert reached for the folder, but his hand froze midway as he processed the implications. Michael, his only child, had actively helped dismantle his life based on Eleanor's lies. That's not possible, Robert whispered. But even as he said it, he remembered Michael's sudden coldness during the divorce, the uncomfortable questions about finances, the gradual estrangement. Victor placed the folder on the desk between them. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, but because your current path has consequences you're not seeing. This isn't just about Eleanor and Brandon anymore. It's about what's left of your family. Robert opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside were bank statements with Michael's distinctive handwriting in the margins, noting withdrawals and transfers with questions about their purpose. Dates matched times when Michael had visited, when Robert had believed they were rebuilding their relationship. Something broke inside Robert. A sob escaped before he could suppress it. Then another. His hand moved instinctively to cover his mouth, but it was too late. The control he'd maintained through decades of intelligence work, through the divorce, through years of isolation, shattered completely. Victor watched silently as Robert collapsed into his chair, shoulders shaking with heaving sobs that seemed torn from somewhere deep and previously untouched. The stoic mask of the intelligence professional dissolved, revealing the wounded father beneath. He was all I had left, Robert managed between sobs. I thought at least he knew who I really was. The evidence wall, so meticulously constructed, now seemed like a monument to obsession rather than justice. Robert's tears fell onto the folder, blurring the ink of his son's betrayal. Thunder crashed outside as Victor moved to the window, giving Robert privacy in his breakdown. Rain lashed against the glass in sheets, mirroring the emotional storm within the room. "I've lost everything," Robert whispered, grief giving way to a despair he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Victor turned back, compassion replacing judgment in his weathered face. "Not everything. Not yet." He gestured to the evidence. "But this path you're on, it risks what remains. Is vengeance worth losing your son permanently?" Robert looked up, face streaked with tears, suddenly appearing every one of his 65 years. "It's not vengeance," he insisted, voice cracking. "It's justice." "Is it?" Victor challenged gently. "Because from where I stand, it looks like a man using professional skills to wage personal war. That's not the Robert Walsh I knew." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with decades of shared history and mutual respect. Robert stared at the folder, at the evidence of his son's unwitting betrayal, and felt the foundation of his purpose crumbling beneath him. "I need to think," Robert finally said, his voice barely audible over the storm. Victor nodded, moving toward the door. "For what it's worth, I believe Eleanor manipulated Michael the same way she manipulated you. He's as much a victim as you are." He paused at the threshold, turning back with uncharacteristic hesitation. "There's something else you should know about Brandon Mercer. Something from my past operations that changes everything." But Robert was beyond hearing more revelations. He waved Victor away, needing solitude to process the cracks spreading through his reality. As the front door closed behind Victor, Robert remained motionless in his study, surrounded by evidence of betrayal upon betrayal. The thunderstorm intensified, rattling windows like the emotions threatening to overwhelm him completely. For the first time since his intelligence days, Robert Walsh had no strategic response, no contingency plan, no path forward through the darkness closing in from all sides. Has betrayal left you shattered and alone? Has someone turned your loved ones against you? Share your pain below, like if Robert's tears mirror your own. Follow to discover how he finds strength when all seems lost. Hours passed in a fog of despair. Robert sat motionless in his leather chair, Victor's revelations echoing in his mind as thunder gradually receded into the distance. The rain softened to a gentle patter against the windows, nature's rhythm steadying when his own internal compass had failed. At 3 a.m., the doorbell rang again. Robert considered ignoring it, but military instinct won out. Unusual patterns demanded investigation. Through the security monitor, he saw Victor standing on the porch once more, shoulders squared with determination. Robert opened the door without speaking. The older man's eyes held something beyond their earlier judgment, a shared understanding that transcended words. "I was 19 when I learned about betrayal," Victor said, stepping inside without waiting for invitation. "Not the garden variety kind, the life-altering kind that changes who you are." In the study, Victor removed his still damp coat, revealing a white dress shirt with rolled-up sleeves. He extended his right arm, pushing the sleeve higher to expose a jagged scar that ran from wrist to elbow, a wound Robert had never seen despite decades of partnership. "Vienna, 1980, Victor explained. "Not the operation you and I worked. An earlier one. My partner gave me up to save himself. I spent 6 months in a basement cell because the man I trusted most decided I was expendable." Robert stared at the scar, understanding dawning slowly through his emotional haze. "You never told me." "Some wounds don't need audiences," Victor replied, rolling his sleeve down. "I'm telling you now because I recognize the look in your eyes. I've worn it myself." Victor moved to the evidence wall, studying it with new attention. "I've been watching Brandon Mercer for years," he said quietly. "Different name back then, but same methods. He was peripheral to an investigation into financial irregularities, supporting unfriendly interests overseas." Robert straightened, professional interest momentarily overriding personal pain. What kind of irregularities? The kind that never quite crossed into prosecutable territory but left destruction in their wake. Victor picked up a file from Robert's desk. Your ex-wife isn't the first person he's manipulated for financial advantage. There's a pattern spanning 15 years and 3 identities. Hope flickered in Robert's chest, not for vindication but for understanding. You have evidence? Victor nodded, reaching into his coat to produce a USB drive. Everything I've collected since I recognized him in that engagement announcement photo. Officially, the investigation closed years ago. Unofficially, he placed the drive on Robert's desk. I never could let go of unfinished business. Robert inserted the drive into his computer, and a new world of information unfolded before him. Brandon Mercer, previously Brian Maxwell, and before that, Benjamin Marsh, had a methodology as predictable as it was effective. Identify wealthy or well-connected partners, establish relationships, manipulate financial positions, then disappear before consequences materialized. Catherine Mills in Boston, Robert murmured, connecting pieces. His parallel fiancé, Victor confirmed. Daughter of a shipping magnate with government contracts. The pattern repeats. For the first time since Victor's earlier visit, Robert felt his analytical mind re-engaging, professional training overriding emotional paralysis. This wasn't just about personal betrayal anymore. It was about a predatory pattern affecting multiple lives. About Michael, Victor said, voice gentling. I brought something else you should see. He produced another folder containing emails between Eleanor and Michael. The context was clear. She had systematically fed him misinformation, playing on his protective instincts and youth. One line stood out painfully. Your father has always kept secrets, Michael. It's who he is. Now he's hiding money that should support my future. She manipulated him, Robert whispered, fresh tears forming but different from before, tears of relief mingled with lingering hurt. Just as she was manipulated by Mercer, Victor observed. Different kinds of victims in the same scheme. As dawn's first light crept through the windows, Robert and Victor reconstructed the timeline using both their evidence sets. The pattern became undeniable. Brandon, Brian, Benjamin moved methodically through relationships, each time elevating his social and financial position before moving on. Robert's phone rang unexpectedly. Michael's name appeared on the screen. Victor nodded encouragement. Answer it. Listen more than you speak. Robert's hand trembled slightly as he accepted the call. Michael. Dad. His son's voice sounded uncertain. I've been trying to reach you. Mom's been saying strange things about her engagement, about Brandon's business. Something doesn't feel right. Robert caught Victor's eye, receiving a subtle nod. I've had similar concerns, he replied carefully, measuring each word. Perhaps we should talk in person. I'd like that, Michael said, the relief in his voice unmistakable. There are things I need to ask you about the divorce, about what Mom told me. After arranging to meet for lunch the following day, Robert set down the phone, a weight lifting from his chest. The conversation hadn't fixed everything, but it had opened a door he'd thought permanently closed. What now? Victor asked, gesturing to the evidence wall. Robert studied the red threads connecting documents, seeing not just a personal betrayal, but a pattern of predation. Now we finish what you started years ago, he said, professional resolve returning to his voice. Not for vengeance, but for truth. Victor smiled for the first time that night. That sounds like the Robert Walsh I know. Through the morning hours, they refined Robert's acquisition strategy for Brandon's company, incorporating Victor's intelligence and Jessica's legal framework. By 9 a.m., Robert made the call that would complete the final phase of the acquisition. The shell companies and trusts he'd established now positioned to take controlling interest in Mercer Communications. Revenge would be taking everything from him, Robert explained as he signed the documents. This isn't revenge. This is accountability. Victor nodded approval. There's a difference between justice and vengeance. One heals, the other corrupts. As Jessica's courier arrived to collect the signed papers, Robert felt a clarity that had been absent since finding Eleanor's invitation. His grief hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something constructive rather than destructive. Victor gathered his coat, preparing to leave. The engagement party is in 3 days. What will you do? Robert straightened his desk, aligning papers with precise movements that reflected his reordered thinking. I'll attend, he said simply. Truth needs no embellishment. As Victor reached the door, he turned back with an uncharacteristic smile. For what it's worth, I always knew you were more than just a secretary. Robert's answering smile held the first genuine warmth in days. So did I. I just forgot for a while. After Victor left, Robert stood before the evidence wall, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't a monument to obsession as he'd feared during last night's breakdown, but a methodical exposure of truth, the kind of work he'd dedicated his life to before retirement. He carefully removed the photos of Eleanor, leaving only the evidence of Brandon's pattern. This wasn't about his ex-wife anymore. It was about stopping a predator before others suffered the same fate. Robert's phone chimed with confirmation from Jessica. The acquisition was complete. On paper, Robert now owned the company that employed Brandon Mercer. The irony wasn't lost on him, but it brought no particular satisfaction, only a sense of pieces falling into their proper places. Outside, the storm had passed completely. Morning sunlight streamed through freshly washed windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in golden beams. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hallway, marking time's forward movement rather than its loss. Robert Walsh straightened his tie, a habitual gesture that now felt like reclaiming part of himself. There was work to do, a son to reconnect with, and truth to be revealed. For the first time in 5 years, the future held more promise than the past held pain. 3 days later, Robert stood before his bedroom mirror, adjusting the silk tie his father had given him for his intelligence service commendation ceremony 20 years ago. Navy blue with subtle silver pinstripes, conservative enough to blend in, distinctive enough to be remembered when it mattered. His fingers moved through the Windsor knot with practiced precision, muscle memory undiminished by years. The evening light slanted through the bedroom windows, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floor. On the bed lay the cream invitation, its expensive paper now a symbol not of pain, but of purpose. Robert's reflection showed a man transformed, the wounded ex-husband replaced by the focused intelligence professional he'd always been beneath the surface. His phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Just arrived at the venue. Still strange being here. When will you get here? Robert typed a careful response. Coming separately. Better this way for now. Their lunch 2 days ago had begun the fragile process of reconciliation, but wounds accumulated over 5 years couldn't heal in a single conversation. Michael now understood he'd been manipulated, but the guilt of his unwitting betrayal remained a barrier between them. Another message appeared, this one from Jessica Wu. Acquisition complete. Paperwork filed. You now own controlling interest in Mercer Communications through Sentinel Holdings. Legal structure untraceable unless someone knows exactly where to look. Robert allowed himself a small smile. Brandon Mercer had been too focused on expansion to notice the gradual accumulation of shares through various shell companies and trusts. By the time Mercer's legal team identified the pattern, the takeover was already complete. A textbook example of the corporate vulnerability assessments Robert had conducted throughout his intelligence career. The antique watch inherited from his father showed 7:15. The engagement party would be in full swing by 8, giving Robert the entrance timing he preferred, late enough for all key players to be present, early enough not to draw undue attention. His phone rang. "Victor, are you certain you want to do this alone?" his old colleague asked without preamble. "Some operations require a single agent," Robert replied, straightening his collar. "Less variables to manage." Victor's sigh carried through the connection. "I have the dossier on Catherine Mills. Confirmed she has no knowledge of Eleanor. Same pattern as the others. Mercer compartmentalizes his lives completely." "Send it to my secure email," Robert instructed. "And Victor, thank you." The gratitude extended beyond the immediate assistance. Victor's return had provided something Robert hadn't realized he needed. Not just an ally in investigation, but a witness to his true self when he'd lost sight of it. After ending the call, Robert opened the velvet box containing his cufflinks, small silver shields bearing the subtle insignia of his intelligence division, recognizable only to those who had served. He inserted them with deliberate care, a ritual that centered him before operations. A final glance in the mirror revealed no trace of the tears that had overwhelmed him days earlier. In their place was the composed expression he'd worn through decades of intelligence work, alert, observant, revealing nothing while missing nothing. Robert paused before the photograph of his father on the dresser. "You always said truth matters more than comfort," he said quietly to the image. "Tonight proves you right." As he descended the stairs, his phone buzzed with an anonymous text. "Reconsider your attendance tonight." The warning carried no signature, no identifying information. Professional enough to suggest serious intent, vague enough to create deniability. Someone knew what he planned. Someone wanted to prevent it. The message only strengthened Robert's resolve. Opposition meant his strategy had been detected, which meant it posed a genuine threat. In intelligence work, that was always confirmation you were on the right track. In the driveway, Robert's modest sedan waited, a deliberate choice over the luxury vehicles he could easily afford. Throughout his career, blending in had proven more valuable than standing out. Tonight would be no exception until the moment he chose to be seen. Has someone stolen your story, erased your achievements? Like if you've been made invisible, comment with your moment of standing tall. Follow to witness Robert's powerful revelation that will change everything. The drive to the Grand Meridian Hotel took 23 minutes. Robert used the time to mentally review the dossier Victor had compiled on Brandon Mercer's pattern. 3 identities over 15 years, 6 known relationships structured for financial advantage, 2 previous engagements conducted simultaneously in different cities, a predator hiding in plain sight behind wealth and charm. Robert parked in the far corner of the hotel's massive lot, positioning for easy exit, another habit from his operational days. And the evening air carried the scent of expensive perfume and freshly cut flowers as guests in formal attire streamed through the hotel's ornate entrance. He checked his watch one final time, 7:52 p.m. In 8 minutes, he would enter. In approximately 20 minutes, he would position himself near Eleanor and Brandon, and shortly thereafter, with precisely chosen words, he would reveal a truth that would change everything. Robert Walsh took a deep breath, straightening his shoulders with the same posture he'd maintained through covert operations across 4 continents. This mission wasn't about intelligence assets or national security, but the principle remained the same. Truth mattered, especially when others worked so hard to conceal it. With steady steps, he walked toward the hotel entrance, ready to reclaim not just his narrative, but his identity. The Grand Meridian Hotel's ballroom sparkled with calculated opulence. Crystal chandeliers splintered light into rainbow fragments across the ceiling. Champagne flowed freely from a tiered fountain, and arrangements of white orchids towered over each table. Robert paused at the threshold, surveying the scene with the practiced eye of an intelligence operative assessing a mission environment. Eleanor and Brandon held court near the center of the room, surrounded by an admiring circle of guests. She wore a cream silk gown that caught the light with each movement, her laugh carrying across the marble floor, with the practiced timbre Robert remembered from charity galas and dinner parties. Brandon stood beside her, one hand possessively at her waist, his Italian suit and carefully tousled hair projecting casual wealth. Robert moved to the bar, positioning himself with clear sight lines while remaining peripheral, a skill honed through decades of surveillance work. He ordered sparkling water with lime, creating the appearance of a cocktail while maintaining complete clarity. From his vantage point, he spotted Michael across the room, engaged in uncomfortable conversation with Eleanor's sister. His son's eyes kept darting toward the entrance. Looking for him, Robert realized with a small pang of emotion he quickly suppressed. This wasn't the moment for feelings to cloud judgment. Robert waited, nursing his drink, watching patterns of movement and conversation. Patience had always been his greatest professional strength. The intelligence community was filled with operatives who moved too quickly, revealed too much, compromised missions through eagerness. Robert had built his reputation on the opposite approach, watching, waiting, striking only when circumstances aligned perfectly. At precisely 8:37 p.m., the alignment he sought began to form. Eleanor's gaze swept the room during a lull in conversation and locked onto him with visible surprise. She whispered something to Brandon, whose head turned with practiced smoothness. A slight narrowing of his eyes was the only indication that Robert's presence was unexpected. Rather than approach them, Robert maintained his position, waiting. The next move would be theirs, and it came exactly as he'd anticipated. Eleanor guided Brandon through the crowd toward Robert, her smile fixed and brittle. 3 couples stopped them en route, extending congratulations and delaying their approach, giving Robert additional minutes to observe their body language. Brandon's arm had tightened around Eleanor's waist, his posture shifting subtly from relaxed charm to alert wariness. When they finally reached him, Eleanor's smile remained in place, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Robert," she said, voice pitched to carry to nearby guests. "What a surprise. I wasn't sure you'd come." "I received an invitation," Robert replied simply, his tone neutral. "Of course," Eleanor said with a dismissive wave. "I just thought it might be uncomfortable for you." Brandon extended his hand with practiced ease. "Brandon Mercer. I don't believe we've formally met, though Eleanor has mentioned you." Robert accepted the handshake, noting the slightly excessive pressure, a common tactic of men attempting to establish dominance. "I imagine she has." "Robert was my first husband," Eleanor explained to the couple who had drifted into their conversation circle. "He worked as a secretary in a government office. Administrative support, wasn't it, Robert?" The deliberate diminishment hung in the air. Several nearby guests paused in their conversations, attention drawn by Eleanor's slightly elevated volume. "Something like that," Robert replied, his smile reaching only the corners of his mouth. Brandon's confident expression never wavered. "And what do you do these days?" "Retirement?" The question was positioned as casual interest, but delivered with subtle condescension. The wealthy man inquiring about the modest life of someone he perceived as irrelevant. The moment had arrived. Robert took a small sip of his water, setting the glass deliberately on a nearby table. The surrounding conversations had quieted, creating the audience Eleanor had intentionally drawn with her loud introduction. "Asset intelligence," Robert said clearly, watching recognition flicker in Eleanor's eyes, the first hint that she understood her mistake. Brandon's laugh held practiced charm. "I'm not familiar with that field. Some kind of accounting?" Robert maintained direct eye contact with Brandon. "It involves identifying vulnerabilities, tracking patterns, and securing acquisitions." He turned slightly to include Eleanor in his gaze. "In fact, I recently acquired a communications company you might know." Brandon's smile remained fixed, but wariness crept into his eyes. "Oh, which one?" Robert stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only Eleanor and Brandon could hear his next words. Mercer Communications. Through various holding companies and trusts, I now own the firm that employs you, Brandon. Or should I say, Brian? Or perhaps Benjamin. The effect was immediate and physical. Eleanor's champagne glass slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a crash that silenced nearby conversations. The champagne splashed across the hem of her cream gown, the stain spreading like truth through lies. Brandon's face drained of color, eyes darting toward the exits with the instinct of a cornered animal. "What are you talking about?" he managed, voice losing its confident edge. "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about," Robert replied, his voice steady and measured. "Your pattern is quite distinctive across all three identities." "Catherine Mills sends her regards, by the way." Eleanor's face transformed from shock to confusion. "Catherine who?" Brandon's hand tightened on Eleanor's arm, voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "This is nonsense. He's bitter about the divorce, trying to cause trouble." But doubt had already taken root in Eleanor's expression. She pulled away from Brandon slightly, looking between the two men with growing understanding. Robert maintained perfect composure, decades of training evident in his steady gaze and controlled breathing. "The severance paperwork was filed this afternoon. Your company email and access credentials have already been suspended." The circle of silence had expanded around them, guests sensing the tension without hearing the specifics. From across the room, Robert could see Michael watching intently, confusion evident on his face. Brandon leaned in, desperation replacing confidence. "Whatever you think you know, I know everything," Robert interrupted quietly. "The pattern across 15 years, 6 relationships, 3 identities, the financial manipulation, the strategic exits, all of it documented and forwarded to the appropriate authorities." Eleanor's parents had approached during the exchange, their expressions shifting from social smiles to concern as they registered their daughter's distress and the growing tension. "What's happening here?" Eleanor's father demanded, protective instinct overriding social niceties. Robert stepped back, creating distance from the unfolding scene. His mission was complete. Truth revealed, consequences in motion. What followed wasn't his concern. "Perhaps Brandon should explain," Robert suggested calmly. "Or Brian, or Benjamin. He has quite a story to tell." With that, Robert turned and walked unhurriedly toward the exit, his back straight, shoulders squared. Behind him, chaos erupted as Eleanor's questions grew louder, Brandon's explanations more desperate, and guests' attention fully captured by the unfolding drama. Near the door, Robert passed Michael, their eyes meeting briefly. Understanding passed between them. Not reconciliation yet, but its possibility. Michael gave a small nod, acknowledgement rather than judgment in his expression. Outside in the cool evening air, Robert loosened his tie slightly, the only concession to the tension of the confrontation. The stars were visible above, unchanging despite the human dramas playing out beneath them. He hadn't sought vengeance, hadn't destroyed Brandon publicly, hadn't humiliated Eleanor beyond what her own choices had created. He had simply spoken truth, allowing its natural consequences to unfold. As he walked to his car, Robert felt no particular triumph or satisfaction, only the quiet contentment of an operation successfully completed, a mission fulfilled according to its parameters. He had reclaimed his narrative not through force, but through fact, his expertise serving truth rather than ego. Some battles were best won through whispers rather than shouts, through precision rather than power. It was a lesson he'd learned through decades of intelligence work, and tonight it had served him one final time. The truth, as he'd told Victor, needed no vengeance to give it weight. Sometimes it burned cleaner than fire all on its own. 2 weeks passed like a cleansing breeze. Robert sat on his front porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of amber and gold. The evening air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and distant rain, the familiar perfume of approaching summer that had marked the rhythm of seasons throughout his life. The business sections of 3 newspapers lay folded beside him on the porch swing, each featuring variations of the same story. Brandon Mercer's abrupt departure from Mercer Communications, the company's restructuring under new ownership, and the SEC investigation into irregularities in its previous management. None mentioned Robert Walsh. His acquisition through Sentinel Holdings remained exactly what he'd intended, visible in result, invisible in execution. Catherine Mills had released a statement through her family's spokesperson, expressing shock at discovering her fiancé's parallel life and thanking the anonymous source who had provided evidence before the planned wedding. Eleanor had maintained public silence, though Robert had heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd left for her sister's home in Arizona. The engagement officially ended. The grandfather clock chimed 7 from inside the house, its familiar tone carrying through the open windows. Robert sipped his iced tea, ice cubes clinking against the glass in perfect counterpoint to the porch swing's gentle creaking. A car turned into his driveway, Michael's sedan, moving slowly as if its driver remained uncertain of his welcome. Robert set his glass down, straightening slightly but remaining seated. Some moments required patience rather than action. The car stopped. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened, and Michael emerged, a leather-bound photo album clutched awkwardly under one arm. He stood for a moment beside his car, eyes meeting Robert's across the distance. Neither man spoke. Then, unexpectedly, the passenger door opened as well. Michael's 7-year-old son, Timothy, scrambled out, breaking the tension with the boundless energy only children possess. "Grandpa!" Timothy called, racing up the porch steps before his father could intervene. Robert found himself enveloped in a hug that carried the simple affection absent from his life for too long. "Hello, Timothy," he managed, emotion making his voice rougher than intended. Michael approached more slowly, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps, the photo album still clutched like a shield or perhaps a peace offering. "I thought we should talk," he said, uncertainty evident in his voice. "About everything." Robert nodded, gesturing to the empty space beside him on the swing. "I'd like that." For several minutes, they sat in silence, broken only by Timothy's excited exploration of the porch's railing spindles and flower pots. The unspoken weight of 5 years of estrangement, misunderstandings, and manipulated perspectives hung between father and son. Michael finally placed the photo album between them. "Mom had these. She gave them to me last week before leaving for Arizona." He opened the cover, revealing family photographs Robert hadn't seen in years. Holidays, graduations, ordinary moments preserved in time. "She told me things," Michael continued, his voice low enough that Timothy couldn't hear. "About the divorce, about Brandon, about what she led me to believe about you." He turned a page, revealing a picture of Robert teaching a much younger Michael to ride a bicycle. "She said I should know who my father really is." A single tear escaped Robert's control, landing on the plastic-covered photograph. He made no move to wipe it away. "And what did you conclude?" he asked quietly. Michael looked up, his eyes so like his mother's, but carrying an earnestness that was entirely his own. "That I've spent 5 years being angry at the wrong parent." His voice cracked slightly. "That I helped hurt you without understanding what I was doing." Robert placed his hand on his son's shoulder, the first physical contact they'd shared since before the divorce. "You were manipulated by someone who excels at manipulation. There's no blame in that." "There's responsibility," Michael countered. "I should have questioned, should have looked deeper." "Perhaps," Robert acknowledged. "But looking backward serves little purpose unless it helps us move forward." Timothy bounded back to the swing, his attention caught by the chessboard Robert had set up on the small table nearby. "Can you teach me?" he asked, pointing to the carved pieces. "I'd like that very much," Robert replied, the simple request bridging generations in a way that complicated adult conversations could not. As the evening deepened around them, Robert showed his grandson the basic moves of each piece, explaining strategy in terms a 7-year-old could grasp. Michael watched silently, occasionally turning pages in the photo album, reconciling the father he'd believed he knew with the man before him. "Mom said you weren't just a secretary," Michael said finally. "She wouldn't tell me what you really did." Robert moved a knight on the chessboard, demonstrating its L-shaped path to Timothy. "Some truths aren't ours to share," he replied, "but I can tell you that I served my country for 30 years, in ways that mattered." "Like a spy?" Timothy asked with a child's directness, eyes widening. Robert smiled. "Like someone who believed truth was worth protecting, even when it wasn't comfortable or convenient." The answer seemed to satisfy both his grandson's curiosity and his son's unspoken question. Michael closed the photo album, placing it gently on the table beside the chessboard. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I know," Robert replied. "So am I." The words were few but sufficient, not erasing the past but creating space for a different future. Some wounds needed acknowledgement more than extensive treatment, especially those between men who shared both blood and reserve. As darkness settled over the neighborhood, the first stars appearing in the eastern sky, Timothy's attention wandered from the chess lesson. "Can I get a cookie from inside?" he asked, already halfway to the door. "Kitchen, second cupboard on the right," Robert directed, smiling as his grandson disappeared into the house. Alone on the porch with his son, Robert felt the weight of unspoken questions in the growing darkness. "You can ask," he said quietly. "About the engagement party. About what happened." Michael shook his head. "I saw enough to understand. Brandon, or whatever his real name is, was running some kind of con. On Mom, on his company, on everyone." He paused. "You stopped him." "I exposed the truth," Robert corrected gently. The rest happened on its own. They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, the porch swing creaking softly beneath them. From inside came the sounds of Timothy rummaging in cupboards, the domestic noise surprisingly comforting after years of quiet. "Will you be all right?" Michael asked eventually. "After everything?" Robert considered the question, looking out at the neighborhood where porch lights were beginning to illuminate the gathering dusk. "I already am," he answered truthfully. The revelation surprised him even as he spoke it. The pain of betrayal hadn't vanished. Such wounds never disappeared completely, but it no longer defined him. In reclaiming his narrative, he had reclaimed himself. Timothy returned with cookies for everyone, chocolate smeared endearingly across his cheek. As they discussed his upcoming school year and Michael's work projects, Robert felt the natural rhythm of family conversation returning, not without awkward pauses or careful navigations around tender subjects, but genuine nonetheless. When Michael and Timothy finally prepared to leave, promises of weekend visits exchanged, Robert stood at the top of the porch steps watching them drive away. The emptiness that followed was different from before, not the hollow absence of loss, but the quiet satisfaction of completion. Inside, he noticed the mail he'd neglected earlier. Among bills and advertisements sat a cream-colored envelope addressed in familiar handwriting. Eleanor's. Unlike the invitation that had begun this journey, this letter was on simple stationery, the postmark showing it had been sent from Arizona 3 days ago. Robert placed it on his desk unopened. Whatever Eleanor wished to say, apology, explanation, or accusation, could wait. Tonight belonged to the future, not the past. He moved to the bookshelf, adjusting the family photographs that had returned to their rightful places. In the glass, he caught his reflection, a man of 65 with the weathered dignity of someone who had faced betrayal and emerged not bitter but whole. Truth may hurt, he said to the empty room, but lies destroy. The grandfather clock chimed 9, its steady mechanism marking time with the same reliability it had shown for decades. Robert Walsh straightened his shoulders, the instinctive posture of a man who had served with distinction, loved with commitment, and finally found peace not through vengeance, but through truth. Outside, distant thunder promised cleansing rain by morning. Folks, we've all sat at that kitchen table, haven't we? That moment when the world stops turning because something in your hands, a letter, a photograph, a phone bill, tells you that what you believed was a lie. Like Robert with that cream envelope, we've felt our fingers tremble, heard our breath catch, tasted salt tears mixing with morning coffee gone cold. Truth is, betrayal hits different when you've got some miles on you. It's not just the hurt, though Lord knows that cuts deep enough. It's the years invested, the shared history suddenly rewritten, the future you counted on vanishing like morning mist. When you've walked 6 decades or more on this earth, trust isn't given lightly. When it breaks, something in your chest breaks too. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Maybe it wasn't a spouse like Eleanor, with her calculated deception. Maybe it was a business partner who took what you'd built, a friend who vanished when illness came, or family who believed the wrong story about you. That moment in your den or kitchen when you realized someone had reduced your life's work to just a secretary, diminished all you'd accomplished, all you'd survived, all you'd learned. The hardest part isn't the crying. It's what comes after, the choice between bitterness and purpose. Like Robert sitting in that leather chair with scattered evidence around him, we all face that crossroads. Do we let the betrayal define us? Or do we straighten our shoulders, adjust our tie, and remember who we really are beneath the pain? I believe there's something powerful in us that grows stronger with years. Call it wisdom, call it resilience. It's that quiet knowing that this too shall pass. It's finding Victor when you thought you stood alone. It's seeing Michael on your porch with a photo album and the courage to begin again. When evening comes and you're sitting on your own porch swing, watching stars appear one by one above your neighborhood, remember this. Your story isn't written by those who betrayed you. The pen remains in your hand. Your dignity was never truly lost, just momentarily forgotten. Your worth never diminished, only temporarily obscured. The grandfather clock keeps ticking, marking not just time lost, but time remaining. There's still good in this world, still truth worth standing for, still love worth opening your door to receive, still strength in your weathered hands to hold what matters most. This isn't just Robert's story. It's yours. It's mine. It's the story of finding our way back to ourselves after loss, one creaking porch swing moment at a time.